Did the Russians meddle in the U.S. election? I would say it goes beyond the elections. I believe they're meddling in our culture and society. Now, to what degree? That's a good question. How effective? It's another good question. But I think it's fair to point out, in all likelihood, it's true. Whatever your political, left, right, whatever, it's likely that Russia is doing this. Why? Because we literally do the same thing in the U.S., and so do many other countries. What's interesting, however, is that the culture war may have been exacerbated by Russians trying to make people fight each other. The story from NBC News: Russian documents reveal desire to sow racial discord and violence in the U.S. The revelations come as U.S. intel agencies have warned of probable Russian meddling in the 2020 election. Of course. But I'll say this, full stop, NBC. When are you going to call out Al Jazeera? They're mad at Russians for making counter rallies of promoting Black Lives Matter, as well as, pro-Trump stuff and Blue Lives Matter. But no one ever calls out Al Jazeera, which is funded very heavily by the Qatari government and produces the exact same content. The story from NBC reads, Russians who were linked to interference in the 2016 U.S. election discussed ambitious plans to stoke unrest and even violence inside the U.S. as recently as 2018, according to documents reviewed by NBC News. Communications between associates of Yevgeny Prigozhin, a Kremlin-linked oligarch indicted by special counsel Robert Mueller for previous influence operations against the U.S., laid out a new plot to manipulate and radicalize African Americans. That's what we've known. And so it's kind of scary to me when you see people who exploit this and make a living off it. People like Sean King, for instance, who rally and get behind Black Lives Matter when they're being radicalized by Russia to create racial tensions in this country. I think it's working. And I think there's a profit motive behind it. Now, before we move any further, go to timcast.com/donate if you would like to support my work. There's a monthly donation option, crypto option, physical address, but of course, the best thing you can do, like the video, comment on the video, share, and subscribe because engagement really, really helps. The documents, they say, the plans show that Prigozhin's circle has sought to exploit racial tensions well beyond Russia's social media and misinformation efforts tied to the 2016 election. The documents were obtained through the Dossier Center, a London-based investigative project funded by Russian opposition figure Mikhail Khodorkovsky. NBC News has not independently verified the materials, but forensic analysis by the Dossier Center appeared to substantiate the communications. We also have many stories corroborating this information that we've heard time and time again, that the Russians were promoting Black Lives Matter, sharing police brutality content because they want people in America to fight each other. One document said that President Donald Trump's election had deepened conflicts in American society and suggested that, if successful, the Influence Project would undermine the country's territorial integrity and military and economic potential. The revelations come as U.S. intelligence agencies have warned of probable Russian meddling in the 2020 election. The documents contain proposals for several ways to further exacerbate racial discord in the future, including a suggestion to recruit African Americans and transport them to camps in Africa for combat prep and training in sabotage. What? This is NBC reporting this? Those recruits would then be sent back to America to foment violence and work to establish a Pan-African state in the South, particularly in South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Okay, hold on. I can get behind the idea that there's a bunch of Russians posting memes that are trying to enrage people to make them fight. But NBC, you really want me to believe that they wanted to send African Americans to Africa for sabotage training and then create a Pan-African state in the South? I think that sounds absolutely insane, NBC, but hey, I'll take your word for it. You're verified by NewsGuard, and you're considered establishment mainstream media who seems to know what they're talking about, though they didn't verify the documents. There is no indication that the plan, which is light on details, was ever put into action, but it offers a fresh example of the mindset around Russian efforts to sow discord in the U.S. The blueprint, entitled Development Strategy of a Pan-African State on U.S. Territory, floated the idea of enlisting poor, formerly incarcerated African Americans who have experience in organized crime groups, as well as members of radical black movements, for participation in civil disobedience actions. The goal was to destabilize the internal situation in the U.S. Frank Figliucci, a former assistant director of counterintelligence at the FBI and an NBC News contributor who reviewed the documents said they offer a warning to the U.S. I also want to point something out before we go on with this really insane conspiracy theory. There seems to be a lot of former intel people who work for the mainstream media, be it CNN, ABC, NBC. It's really weird. If you follow people like Michael Tracy and Glenn Greenwald, they highlight this kind of issue a lot because these people are cheerleaders for foreign military intervention. They're cheerleaders for the deep state narrative. And I mean deep state in a somewhat half-joking way. Whether you believe there is a deep state, there are intel agencies that exist within government. Whether or not the president or Congress changes, they're always there. People refer to this as the permanent government. It's very interesting, then, that we have this absolutely absurd document about trying to create a Pan-African state being pushed by NBC, who admits they didn't verify it, but then they have a former FBI counterintelligence, former assistant director, saying it's a warning to the U.S. Regardless of whether or not these plans are an amateurish thought experiment, the fact that these people are talking about doing this should disturb Americans of all stripes. The unfortunate reality is that we're seeing an adversary that will consider virtually anything to get what it wants. And if it means violence or splitting America along racial lines or eroding our trust in institutions, they'll do it. Some of the documents appear to have been sent by Zakun and Aslanov, a lot of Russian names here, an employee of the Internet Research Agency, the St. Petersburg-based troll farm that played a key role in the 2016 Russian meddling campaign. Aslanov was one of 13 indicted by Mueller in February. The plan was shared with Mikhail Potemkin, a Russian businessman who then circulated it more widely according to communications reviewed by NBC News. They say that they're both linked to Prigozhin, a Russian catering magnate often described as Putin's chef. Prigozhin was also indicted by Mueller for funding the IRA. Widely perceived as a Kremlin operative, he has been connected to a shadowy mercenary outfit known as the Wagner Group, whose guns for hire are reported to have been involved in Russian military operations in Syria and eastern Ukraine, according to U.S. military officials. Okay, now hold on. That sounds pretty badass. I'm not a fan of this, but now we're getting into like deep action thriller territory where guns for hire are committing these crazy-ass sting operations. I mean, that sounds pretty fun and movie-esque. Although when you actually think about what's happening, it's kind of nightmarish because it's actual war. Oh, wait, what is this? A map of the U.S. overlaid with information about African-American population size in 7 southern states that was part of a cache of documents found in communications from Russians linked to U.S. election interference. They were I can't read it. It's Cyrillic and likely Russian. But is this the Pan-African state that they were trying to create? It excludes Florida, apparently. They say Rep. Val Demings, Florida, who was brief in the documents, said they highlight how ongoing racial issues in the U.S. can be used in misinformation efforts. Russia understands how critical the African-American vote is to determining the outcome of elections. And because we have not effectively dealt with racism as a country ourselves, I believe we've made ourselves vulnerable to foreign powers like Russia to continue to try to undermine. The documents also discuss how to expand Russia's clout on the African continent and win business there. From arms sales to mining contracts, they outline propaganda efforts to target Africans and stir up negative opinions about Europe and the U.S. I mean, look, Russia may be trying to do this. America has powerful interests in South America and Africa. And one of the biggest fronts right now in what's going on between the U.S. and the U.S.'s enemies or adversaries is control of strategic resources in Africa and South America. China is doing massive oil exploration, for instance. They want to build a Nicaraguan canal to compete with the Panama Canal. So yeah, it's entirely possible Russia needs clout among African nations. But let's just read the finale here. They say, the idea of African statehood has an intellectual precedent in Russia. During the early 20th century, communists in America proposed forming a black belt nation in the South. Some party members traveled to the Soviet Union for training. Even though these kinds of initiatives from the Russians aren't new to us, what is new is the rapidity with which they can get this message out on social media and saturate the American consumer with these kinds of thoughts, said Figliucci, former FBI official. That puts the Russian initiative on steroids and should scare all of us. Richard Engel reported on this. He's like a really respected top dude over at NBC News. So I don't know whether or not Russia wants to form a Pan-African state. I find the story absolutely insane. But hey, man, the truth can be stranger than fiction. So I'll leave it there. Let me know what you think. Do you believe this to be true? Again, I'll stress that we have had some information in the past that Russia was trying to sow discord between Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter, but this takes it a step further. So let me know what you think. I've got one more story coming up for you in just a few moments, so stick around and I will see you shortly.